Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to the World Majlis. Today, our topic is off the beaten path, travel in the 21st century. We have a very interesting panel today. I'll start with myself, Saeed al-Saeed. I'm a world citizen and an avid traveler. I've been to about 70 countries in my life, so I'm still not near my goal of 200 plus, but getting there. Online we have Arvind Singh, who is the IAS Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism of India. We have Professor Anne Hardy from the University of Tasmania in Australia, and Deepak Diva, the Managing Director of the Travel Corporation India. On stage with me here, starting from my left, we have Ana Pais, Head of Education at Turismo de Portugal. And we have Roger Valencia, the former Minister of Trade and Tourism and Culture as well in Peru. And to my right, we have Luis Araujo, President of Turismo de Portugal, and John Pagano, the CEO of the Red Sea Development Company. I hope I didn't butcher any of your names.
Perfect.
Did well? All right. We'll start the conversation off with a definition. I would like to start with our online participants, maybe starting with Arvind. What is sustainable tourism to you?
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to start the conversation. Sustainable tourism is tourism that leaves the community at least as well off as it was before the arrival of tourists in that area, if not better off. So essentially, it is tourism that takes care of the carrying capacity of the region, that adds to the culture and heritage of the region where the tourists are going to, and it's tourism that adds to the economic and social benefit, well-being of the area. So essentially, it's that tourism which leaves the local community better off than it was, before the tourists have arrived at the place. That, in a nutshell, to me, is the essence of sustainable tourism.
Thank you, Arvind. Anne, would you like to give your input?
Thank you, yes. To me, sustainable tourism is a concept that hinges upon 4 pillars. So I believe that sustainable tourism is about protecting the environment, it's about protecting community, it's about economic efficiency, and it's also about the provision of fantastic tourism experiences. And sort of overarching those principles for me, I believe it's a type of tourism that's adaptive, it's resilient, and it also has qualities which we often hear about at the moment called regenerative. So it's a concept where tourism doesn't just take, it gives back, and it can actually improve those particular tenets that I just mentioned.
Talking about, and this is the best definition of sustainability, became the norm. People started working remote and became digital nomads. Luxury travel, which is considered the worst offender, slowly grew into, slowly grew a conscience and actually turned into conscious travel. Less is more. Regenerative travel has already been spoken about. There is, the entire feeling about wellness and mindfulness. These are all, inclusive tourism, green tourism, staycation, these are all defining sustainability or are bringing sustainability to the forefront. And I think this is how is the best way to define sustainability, is the change that has come to us in the last 2 years, or we have become more aware of, and we now need to make sure that, we take it forward.
Okay, thank you. Anna?
So for me, sustainable means, of course, a concept that we already heard, but more than a concept should be a commitment, a responsibility. So I will focus that for me it's a responsibility for the 3 kind of people that are working in tourism. the tourists themselves, they have to be committed, responsible where they travel. They have to be informed about local, so they can be awareness about what they should preserve, and as the colleagues mentioned, giving back, but not only the tourists, the local communities and the workers. So we have people around this triangle that should be commitment to a change, and that is the sustainability in tourism, is that we need to go from this concept to an act, and act responsibility within this triangle that are responsible for tourism these days.
Thank you. Roger?
A lot has been said already, So one key issue that I believe is the moment in which we are talking about this. So we are at an opportunity. We are in a moment in history that we actually have the tools, we have the technology, we have the know-how to actually see responsible tourism or sustainable tourism as an opportunity. For some countries who have started very slow in tourism, it's an opportunity to learn from those who have committed, who had failures on the past. And for those who have reached unsustainable levels in tourism, it's an opportunity to restart, because we are in the middle of pandemic. At the end of the day, tourism is nothing else but a consumer traveling from one place to consume in another place. And so it has to do with transportation. It has to do with how we get there. And that's a very key question for sustainability. Not only the destination, but also how you get there. And the other very key issue where I see the opportunity is the quality of the experience. What is the new customer looking for? Because the new traveler, the pre-pandemic traveler had certain ideas about what he was looking or she was looking for at the destination. The new traveler has other ideas, and that will shape our tourism in the future. So to me, sustainable tourism is an opportunity for the world.
Excellent. Luis?
Well, thank you so much. First, it's wonderful to be here with all of you. For me, sustainability in tourism is thinking tourism as a force for good in a country, in a region, in a family, a source of employment, of economic growth, of well-being for people. That's sustainability in tourism. We cannot think of tourism as a sector that it's either the victim or the villain of the transformations in the world. Of course, we have to point the finger to what we have to change, and we do have to change a few things, either in the environmental part or the social part. But it's clear, and I think we will have some discussion on that later on, but for me it's clear that tourism is a force for good, and we have to promote it as a force for good, to change the attitude of people, that's for sure, but most important, for our well-being and the well-being of the planet.
John?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. For me, sustainable tourism is about changing our relationship with the natural environment. It's no longer the case that we can just take the natural environment for granted, and I don't think that consumers going forward will allow that to happen. And so we really do need to be much more aware of and appreciate the value of our natural capital. We also have to work within the communities within which our developments are located, where tourism developments are being.
One of you is working on advancing that agenda that you just discussed. There was a very good point that the new consumer, the new traveler is different, and I think a lot of the travel habits have changed and the behaviors have changed because of the pandemic. People are no longer interested in going into crowded malls and crowded events and concerts per se. People are looking to get away from the crowd, and that is an opportunity.
Did some fantastic pictures, And the office, actually, you worked for Emirates, so worked in the past, in your previous life.
Yes.
In Emirates Airlines saw the picture, and they wanted to use it for their promotion. And as they wanted to use this for the promotion, their legal advisory told them you cannot use it because you can't fly, you don't fly to Peru. No, so you're going to be promoting Peru and you don't fly to Peru. So nevertheless, they used the picture. And I think we can share maybe the picture if there is. That's the ad, actually. And what they were saying is, be there to touch the unknown. So they were not saying Peru anywhere. Okay? And by just putting this picture on the front page of the New York Times and the Times of London and a few other big newspapers in the world, they actually made this destination known to the world. It was so incredible that the community that lived there, the community that lives there, Chilka and Okongati community, they sent a question associated to the picture of the New York Times to the world, saying, if you tell me where it is, because it doesn't say anywhere that's there, if you tell me where it is, we'll pay your trip. We'll pay your visit, okay?
I'll interrupt you, actually. Who here knew that the Rainbow Mountain was in Peru?
Oh, you see, this is very interesting.
Yes.
Okay, so there is 4.5 million people in 1 month had sent their queue to where it was, everywhere in the world. I mean, some people said it was in China, some people was in Austria, everywhere in the world. But there were some winners, but the most interesting thing is that the people in these communities responded to every single one of those queues, saying, this is in Peru, it's 110 kilometers southeast of Cusco, and welcome. You didn't win, but you're still welcome to come. So that's how this destination was made to be known, and I think that whose job it is to make a destination viable, not only the work of the municipality, not only the work of the community or from Peru, but the work also of the same travelers. I can tell you that because most of these people are going to hike, this mountain is 5,000 meters high. So when you go to hike to 5,000 meters, you actually are a committed traveler. You're not a casual traveler. There's no one single piece of paper thrown on the trail. People actually, travelers that do the extent of hiking on a high mountain top are actually people who are committed to what we care most, and that's our planet.
Well, since we have a government official on our panel, I would ask you, Arvind, how do you feel the government's role is when it comes to developing these new destinations?
If you talk about the new destinations, definitely, post the pandemic, the preferences of the consumers have changed. They're looking for different experiences, and they're looking for, for instance, one example that we see in our country is that the use of the digital media to access and to plan their trips and plan their travel has gone up. Different kind of destinations far away from the distant crowds and far away from the cities, where you have open spaces are becoming more and popular. So as mentioned by the previous speaker, the local authorities definitely have a role because they have to look at the carrying capacity of these destinations. And we have examples in our country where some local authorities, the local bodies, the urban or the rural bodies are placing restrictions on the number of visitors who can come there, because typically some destinations attract people in certain seasons or on certain days in the week or month, on the weekends or during holidays. And at times such places the crowds at these places become unsustainable. So the local administration has a very important role to play in terms of regulating the ingress. The role of the state or the national authorities would be to incentivize that kind of sustainable practices by the local stakeholders who are all there, and also to popularize responsibility and talk about responsible travel among the tourists. If I have to give you my example from the Government of India, we are working with, there is a body called the Responsible Tourism Society of India, in collaboration with them and the United Nations Environment Program, where we are launching a responsible traveler program. So that we make the travelers also feel responsible and take responsible actions when they're traveling to these destinations. So I think while efforts are required on the behalf of the local community as well as the stakeholders at the destination level and at the local community there, I think governments can pitch in by encouraging responsible travel.
Excellent. So I think there's a regulatory, principally a regulatory effort by the government to make sure that developers such as you, John, who I'm coming to next, make sure that there is a certain level of sustainable approach to the development. Can you tell us more about what you guys are doing in Saudi?
Sure. I do agree that governments and regulators need to facilitate, they need to support and to encourage. But as a developer, we too bear a responsibility, because ultimately we're the drivers. We bring the capital, we bring the innovation and the ideas. And as I said, I think in my definition of sustainable tourism, we have to change now. We have to change the way we do things now. I think COVID has given us this opportunity to hit the big reset button. Everybody's got a much greater awareness of health, planet, environment, and so on, and we need to seize upon that. So what we're doing in Saudi Arabia, I think, is quite remarkable. We're in a country that is rich in oil, and we're choosing to do things differently. So what I mean by that is, for me and my definition of sustainability, it's no longer enough, right? We no longer have the luxury to do what we've done before and maintain the status quo, because we're on a trajectory where we're on a trajectory where if we don't change our behavior, we're not going to exist. So we've now taken and changed the narrative from sustainability to regeneration. And for us, regeneration means making the place better. Not maintaining it, but making it better than when you found it, so that it's protected for future generations to enjoy. And how are we doing that? We're doing it in so many different ways. As I said, our relationship with our natural environment is very different. We're protecting our natural habitats, we're protecting islands, we're protecting, endangered species, because I think that's what the travelers are going to want to come and see and experience. They want to be connected to nature once again. We're going to be building the biggest tourism development in the world, powered 100% by renewable energy, 24 hours a day, totally off-grid. It's never been attempted before. Somebody said earlier in their definition that, the technology exists. Absolutely it does. But it requires that will, the will to do things differently. Does it cost more money? Absolutely. Is the price worth paying for our children and our grandchildren's future? Absolutely. So for us, it's no longer a time to talk, it's a time to act. And as a developer, we need to lead by example. So the Red Sea in Saudi Arabia is setting the standard, setting the bar extremely high, because I fully believe that our consumers are going to demand it, and we're going to force others to follow our lead. So that's something that we're particularly proud of at the Red Sea and in Saudi Arabia in terms of the course of action that we're taking.
No, I definitely love the approach, and I appreciate it, especially knowing how easy it could have been to just go back to the same old methods. But having said that, I think it's easier to have a blank slate. So, Luis, maybe you can give us a bit of the restrictions that you have with a destination that has historically existed for thousands of years, and then the knowledge of the tourist that comes knowing what they want to do. And this is something that you mentioned. They think they know, but then it's your job to educate them. but also somewhere like Sintra, what can you do really to redevelop or redesign a place that has existed for so long?
I think, going back to your question, and it has to do a lot with this, whose responsibility is it to have a more sustainable tourism? I would say it's everyone. And starting by the government, I'm an official institution, so I depend on the Minister of Economy in Portugal. And the governments have a huge responsibility in defining what can or can't be done. We're changing, we've launched a 3-year plan last year to accelerate sustainability in our country. We want to reach 90% of any enterprise that works with tourism in Portugal by 2027 has to be 90% dependent on renewable energies with efficiency measures in water management, in waste management. So there is a big concern and a big responsibility. I'll give you one idea. And one of the things that we are doing, we're changing the regulation. In Portugal, you will not be able to be a 5-star hotel if you don't have efficiency measures in waste, energy, and water management. It's not about having a 24-hour reception or slippers in your bedroom. So you have to do that. And that's something that is crucial right now. So
Are you providing subsidies for people to do
we
that?
are, and we're not giving money, and that's something that we do. Loans given by the government to tourism enterprises in Portugal, if they don't comply with very strict measures of sustainability, you don't get the money, you don't get the funding. And this is something that should be done in other countries, because I think when we talk about responsibility and going back to responsibility, governments, enterprises, we're talking of a sector that depends on micro enterprises all over the world. It's very small businesses all over the world. And we have a responsibility, especially big corporations and big brands, not only to showcase, but to give the tools to these very small enterprises, either by training, and I'm sure Ana Paula will talk about that, by financing, by giving the example, by investing. And I think it's very valid that we have these kind of investments in countries that can do the investment, but it's important to also invest in smaller countries, because we're all connected, and it's something that we learned here in Expo. I've been learning a lot these past 2 days, trust me. So this is vital. And that change, that responsibility starts with this kind of I won't say of people, of enterprises. And you said something at the beginning. It's not only about the environment, it's also about society. I don't know if you know, but of the 100 big corporations that work in tourism in the world, think of hotel companies, airline companies, travel agents. Of the 100, more than 60% of the people that work in these companies are women. Only 5% of the CEOs of these companies are women. So this balance has to be reached. Until we do not reach this balance, and I agree, it's time to act, but it's time to take compromise. It's time to get this responsibility clearly on our hands and do something. So to go back to Sintra, I would say, and to Portugal, I would say that, of course, it's important to protect, to evaluate. Data is crucial. I'm sure Anne will talk about that, and technology, to help us get the lead and do something about it. But it's much more considering, I'm responsible for a country, for Portugal, for the tourism of a country. I'm so concerned with my country as I am with any other country in the world, because this is not just about the tourism sector in Portugal, it's about the tourism sector all over the world.
Ecosystem, yeah.
And I think that if we trust on the consumer, John, we're talking about a niche that is concerned about sustainability, and we have to accelerate this. We need much more people to be concerned about this. So we have to work on all sides.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of all sides, Deepak, do you guys look at new itineraries and try to push people in a certain direction when it comes to what they had planned versus what you can actually offer them? Is there a new, do you have a team dedicated for the development of new activities, new travel plans? You're muted. It's okay, it's classic COVID faux pas. Don't worry about it.
No, but can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So what I was saying was that it's a very good question, because we can talk about what the government can do and what the travelers should do. But I think also what is very important today is that we have within the organization a set of people who are discovering new products. We have also then got a set of people with certain parameters which we've learned over the last 1 year, and have measured we are measuring each hotel and each product that we offer and categorizing it on a sustainability index. Then what we are doing is we are taking these products and saying, here is a classical tour that you do, and these are the hotels and their sustainability index. So what we're doing is we are making people conscious of the fact that there is a choice of hotels, and you can choose a sustainable hotel, which may be more expensive or less expensive. That is one part to it. But we are also creating itineraries in which we are specifically working with sustainable products. And, even down to things like, use of plastic and all is very old now, but we are even going down to taking people on trains, because it's more sustainable than going by road. And we are finding hotels that have done a fantastic job and encouraging people to stay longer at these places. And I can tell you, it's been a fantastic experience and great learning. On one side, clients are coming to us and saying, there is a sustainable, we need to travel in a sustainable manner and offer it to our customers. What do you have? And we are going back and saying, there is this whole list that exists, and we are very fortunate to be in a country like India, because we have a phenomenal product offering, and we have been living a sustainable existence for many years in different parts of a trip that you do. So it's been a great joy. We've really enjoyed this whole journey in the last 2 years to build all this up, and we are finding great interest in 2022 when the business comes back to the country. And we, listen, any organization or country that wants business in the future has to offer products that are sustainable, number one, and number two, have to go out and portray that there is a sense of sustainability, and this in the country, people understand it, and we know how to deliver it in a genuine manner. It's not a slogan anymore. This is going to become an absolute essence of doing business anywhere in the world in tourism.
Great. And Luis threw you under the bus. He mentioned data and pointed your way. What is the role of data when it comes to sustainable tourism from your point of view?
I think that data can challenge an enormous amount of assumptions that we've had over the last, 20, 30, 40 years about tourism. So, from the perspective of understanding how tourists actually travel, data has, prior to, the internet, and 10 or 15 years ago, before we had the internet, we used to rely on things like surveys, and we still actually do. So many organisations still do surveys to try and work out where people are going, how long they stay, and also the decisions that they make in order to decide, where to actually go and how to move between places. So now with data, we don't necessarily have to rely on surveys where people can't actually remember where they've been. We can actually ask them with their permission to track them, and then we can understand how they move. And I think for me, if we propel sort of into the future, and if we think about sustainability, I think that data offers us the opportunity to actually interrupt decision making. There's been a lot said before in the past few minutes about how we need to encourage different decision-making processes. And that's not just about purchasing, it's also about where people actually go. And we can actually change that behaviour in almost real time. So, for example, if we think about COVID at the moment, I live in a small island community down in the bottom of Australia, And as tourism has returned, some of the communities have been hit really hard by COVID, and they've actually put their hand up and said, government, can you please stop that? We need to turn the tap off on tourism. We need to stop. We need to protect these marginalised people who live in our communities. Now, if we had a system, for example, where people who came to our island put an app on their phone and we knew where they were, we could actually send messages out to them and encourage them to go to different places if we knew that those communities were under pressure. And there's many other examples of how you can actually do that. You know, if you know that car parks are full in national parks, you can use data and technology to encourage people to go and look at different places. So we can actually use data to actually encourage behaviour change. It can assist with communities in not feeling so much pressure. It can prevent over-tourism, and it can actually deliver a better experience. So I think that, you know, data provides, and technology provides us with a lot of opportunity, not just to know what people are doing, but actually to change the way that they're actually doing it. And for me, that's a really, really exciting, you know, possibility that we can do it now. And it amazes me often that we're not actually doing it. So that's where I sort of see some exciting opportunities in terms of sustainability.
On a scale of 1 to 5, how likely do you, I'm just kidding, I hate surveys. I saved you for last because I think there is a huge conversation about the sustainability of tourism as an industry without us old people on the panel being there for long. So how are we looking at the young generation and how to excite them about the industry from A to Z? I know there's the culinary part that you have under your belt, but also the service industry and airlines and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I believe that the education is the key for all that can unite all this changing behavior. We are talking about changing, so we cannot change if we don't have the knowledge to do it. So I think the education, the training in tourism have, I believe, two major challenges. One of course, is continue to fulfill all these needs that we have for the new travelers, the new tourism. But most of all is to know how can we train, can we educate people to be sustainable workers, employers, technicians, because it's not only about training for tourism. Tourism is a global industry, so if you don't have this global perspective of sustainable education in other sectors, it will be much more difficult because, for instance, if you think about building even a more sustainable resort with natural care and everything, if all the workers don't have this behavior sustainably, knowledge sustainable, it will be much more difficult. So I think we have to balance the education for tourism in these two levels. Training, of course, we need to adapt the new methods. We need to rethinking the school as a fixed and we need to build, I could say, learning communities, because tourism is building about the respect for the community. So you need to involve the communities, you need to commit the local, but also the tourism when they arrived. But at the same time, we need to change other sectors' behavior because they are the suppliers for tourism, because they work also for tourism. So, for instance, if you think how to educate to be more sustainable, you have to start in the primary school or even before, because it's too late when you are an adult. If you go to a tourism school, of course you can learn skills, but you cannot unlearn your values. So I think the countries need to reorganize the training in tourism and starting much much before in the education system, and of course working with the technical skills, but more the thinking skills, the social skills that we need to have as these three pillars, as workers, as tourists, and also as the local residents. So it's a huge challenge for tourism schools to change this approach and to cooperate with other schools, not only in the specific area of tourism, but getting together this mindset of sustainability as a way of living, not just a way of work or a way of act, but a way of living. So you have to think in a different way. And just to give you an example, in Portugal we have this network of public tourism schools, and we are running different projects to reposition the schools not as a place where you go to learn. Of course, you continue to do that, but to have a network of institutions that are based on the local community, that are responsible to act not only in tourism, but in culture, in sport, in health, that can connect every pieces of the community, so we can deliver the training or the education that the community needs, not the training or the education that we think that we should do. We need to adapt. So adaptation is also another pillar in education.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears. I want to latch on to something that was briefly touched upon by everyone on the panel, which is regenerative tourism. And it's very easy to think of it as I go to an island on the Maldives, I pay a little bit of money, and I plant something that can then grow corals on it, or I go to the Amazon rainforest and I plant a tree, so that I'm kind of giving back. But I want to focus a bit on something that not a lot of people think about, which is the communities of these places. And with that, I think before we get into it, there's a video message from Costa Rica.
Hello, my name is Conchita Espino. I am the Executive Director of Asociación Maramar, Costa Rica. Indeed, an important question, ensuring that the economic benefits of tourism are beneficial to local communities. And in answering that question, I would highlight two major aspects of what beneficial might mean. In developing the Camino de Costa Rica, we have from the start defined our mission precisely to ensure that the tourist dollars stay in the community. The services provided are by definition small in scale. The lodges and campgrounds are small. They can only handle a small volume of tourists. Our work with these villages uses the concepts of fomenting regenerative communities. The organic growth use local resources and fomenting the product change, organic development of the most proximal area. The second major aspect of beneficial to the local community has to do with the social and environmental aspect and impact the tourist activity leaves on the community itself. We purposely focus on 1, developing and strengthening local institutions, 2, ensuring equity through the empowering of women entrepreneurs, 3, celebrating and fomenting the development of local traditions and culture, 4, investing in education, and 5, implementing small reforestation projects and focusing on conservation and protecting the environment. Thank you very much, and we welcome you to come visit us.
Isn't Conchita so cute? She's adorable. I think that's a great example of what it is to look at the communities, how to serve them, how to have them benefit as well from from tourists coming over and spending dollars there. I'll just go in this direction. What's your input when it comes to how do we focus on regeneration for the communities involved in the tourism industry?
This is a huge challenge, I believe, for even for us as a small country. We need to work on that because it's the way, and if we come back to the colleague words, it's the way to give more than take it from the community. So it's something that we can use tourism to resolve the community problems, not to add problems, but to resolve it. So beginning, I think we need to define more instruments to involve the communities, because sometimes we have assumptions about the questions that are defining a local community, and most of those times we don't know for sure that. So we need to hear the local communities. Of course, we have to educate them more and more, that will enable them to be more participative, because sometimes we know that people are difficult in be participative, but besides that, they have ideas, but they have difficulty to share them and to start act. So these regenerative communities, we need to have some, I could say, some drivers, some people that can start to change the communities, and then to provide more and more learn about the communities, so they can decide from themselves what and where they want to invest in the development, not tell from outside what they should do, because like that we will preserve the communities and add value that can make those community growth in the natural way, not in outside view.
When I went to Peru, I think both in Cusco, whether it was in Sacsayhuaman, and no, don't mishear me. Can you say the place name?
Sacsayhuaman.
Thank you very much. That's the name of the actual place. And in Iquitos, in the rainforest, in the jungle, I saw that there was a reliance on the community for the labor component of tourism. But I think that was a given. That was a necessity. What did you guys do to develop that component of it, and then also support these communities?
Yes, it's a very important question. Peru is one of 5 places in the world where people went from hunting and gathering to domestic, to producing. So it's one of those places where people went from migrants to settlements, to culture. And so our question in Peru is how today Peruvian culture translates itself to the contemporary of music, in terms of design, in terms of our own aesthetic, our own way of seeing things. Andean culture has contributed a lot to the world in many different ways. I mean, when you think about food, and you've enjoyed Peruvian food, so you know about what I'm talking about. But and you can try it here in the Peruvian Pavilion. But in general, if you think on food, about half of what is known as food today in the world comes from the Andean cultural process. You know, from potatoes to tomatoes to quinoa.
I'm still waiting for cuy to be imported here. By the way, cuy is a delicacy in Peru. It's a guinea pig. Oh,
okay.
No way.
So
yeah, delicious white meat, just like chicken.
yeah, just like. Then communities are part of our tourist product. We cannot think of tourism in Peru without involving the communities. And there's rural tourism in the Andes, there is communities in the Amazon, there's communities all over the coastal area of Peru. Very few people talk about that, but we have Japanese communities, and you go to, and part of our food, I mean, Nobu is here. Nobu is here, and Nobu learned how to cook in Peru. Rosita Jimura is his auntie, and he went from Japan to Lima, learned how to cook in Lima, then went to New York and made a huge success. And his most famous dish was actually invented by the auntie, is tiradito. And so for us, our main question is, how do we translate ourselves to continue contributing and giving color to the world? Because the world is becoming, sadly to say, a more uniform space, okay? And more, the malls look one just like the other. And so when we see that, and when we see millennial cultures, and many countries have a lot of different factors, we think that the main question is, in a world that has become one, in a global village, how do we share who we are? And that, in this fashion, we see tourism as an opportunity, because people who have actually come to Peru, then later on look for some of the products of Peru, like you're looking for cuy.
Yes.
Sorry.
Well, I'm looking for lomo saltado.
For lobo saltado.
Actually,
yes.
alpaca is also delicious. Any cute animal somehow is delicious. It's unfortunate, really. Actually, what was interesting is how the tour operator that we had gone to these historic sites took us to also a village where the people of that village, the community, showed us old Andean customs and culture. So one of them was the lipstick that, that they crush the insects and then the red color and they just put on. Yeah. Sounds disgusting, but it's
did you know that there was no red color in painting before the 15th century? You know, cochineal.
Yes.
Which comes from the cactus bug, was actually not available in the world, and red was very difficult to get for painting. But after the both Mexico and Peru, once the Europeans arrived to Peru and Mexico, then they took cochineal off. But very little is known, for example, how China got to become part of the trading route, and Europe, Spain, at the time was not Spain. At the time, it was the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Emperor was Charles V, 1510, when they actually ordered the ship of Manila to return via the Sea of Japan to Canada and then to Mexico. The silver, the gold, and the copper of Peru went to pay for the imports that will come from Manila via the sampan from China, and then those were shipped through Mexico to Spain. So the growers of silk in Valencia, in Spain, went to the emperor, to Philip II, and said, please, sir, put a limit on what you are importing from China because we're going bankrupt. Well, 30 years after, they went bankrupt. and so China silk, ceramics, and manufactured goods were so cheap that that the silk growers in Valencia went bankrupt. So they put a limit on the number of vessels, okay? I'll finish this story. 20 vessels, okay? You know, the tonnage of the vessels when the ban was established was X. 10 years later, it was 20 times bigger. So the number of vessels stayed at 20, but the tonnage had multiplied to supply and demand. Yeah. So I agree, John. It will be the consumer who will shape tourism in the future.
That we can go into another. I think we should. Can we set up another session to go into the history of this? I forgot what we're talking about.
Regenerative
Thank you very much.
In communities.
Yes. Yeah. So communities. I think she touched upon the Portuguese conundrum, let's call it, because you're trying to figure out how to include these communities, but also benefit them in some way. Can you tell us from your position how you're actively trying to engage these communities?
Yeah, well, I think it has to do, first it has to do with clear information and communication. We've been developing, and we say that the best way to have sustainability in tourism, there's no simple, it's a 3-rule principle. You need people all year round in the entire territory and from different markets. This is the holy trinity of tourism that any country or region or destination needs. So we've been promoting, especially over the past 2 years, which I think have been very challenging and mind-blowing in terms of what to do. We changed our communication 2 years ago in 2020, and we said that was not the time to visit Portugal. It was the time to read about Portugal. So we stimulated everyone in the entire world to buy books about Portugal or Portuguese authors. And I know Roger is a very good has a very good knowledge of Portuguese writers
Literature.
and literature to stimulate how to think about tourism. That became being a project for literary tourism that we're now developing in the entire country. And when we talk about this, we talk about wine tourism, cycling and walking, industrial tourism. And going back to the communities, industrial tourism has to do with old activities in Portugal, like the salt mines or fishing or how to preserve the tuna inside cans. This has been developed over the past years, and it's now a touristic activity. So you can actually visit the factories. You can buy the products, and it's a win-win situation for both. What this has to do is that most communities start seeing tourism as a very positive thing for their activity. If I own a factory that builds or fabrics hats or sells shoes or whatever, I can see it as a positive activity to showcase what I'm doing and the tradition of what I'm doing and sell it afterwards. And this has to do with information and communication. And it's important that it goes both ways. So it's important that, of course, a tourist knows what is happening in that country and how valuable it is to us. But it's also important that the tourist understands my values and why this is important to me. Because we always say that, of course, Portugal is a very small country. I'll give you a short example. Everyone thinks we're like Spain. We're like the Spanish. We're not. We like going bed early. We don't shout in the streets. And I can say this because I'm half Spanish, so I'm allowed to do this. We don't shout in the streets, and we don't shout inside a restaurant. So this is important. No, but this is important because...
You also have a siesta.
We don't. See, that's something different.
Yeah.
That's why they go to bed early.
Exactly.
That's why we need to go to bed, sleep, to go to bed early. But it's important to understand this. And once again, when going back to the data and the information and communication, the change and the shift of paradigm in terms of tourism worldwide, local lodging was the biggest shift we had in the last years. Why? It affects the management of a city. And I'll give you a short example. If you stay in a hotel, you don't care who takes care of your garbage. But if you stay in a local lodging, you have to know where to put your garbage, where to park, what to do, what kind of times you have to go or to go for dinner, or where do I lunch. So this is the kind of communication and information that is valuable for local communities, both for enterprises, but for the community as a whole. So we clearly need to improve our openness and our communication in terms of what we do and how to benefit both those who visit and those who are visited.
John,
Thank you.
how do you introduce, I guess, we have, I think the world has a very specific view of the Saudi individual. He's rich, he doesn't need to work in a hotel or in the service industry, but we know from living in Saudi myself for 2 years, we know that that's not true. Do you have any plans as a developer to include the Saudi population, the actual community that you're building around as part of the developments in the future?
Absolutely. So I think I said so in the introduction. I think it's important that we engage our local communities and uplift them in the process. So, we've reached out to our local communities. We are creating opportunities for our local communities. We have people that interact with the local leaders, and this part of it is tribal, part of it is, community-based. And we're determining opportunities for them. So, and I'll give you a series of examples. So for example, again, we're committed as a destination to be carbon neutral day one. So for us, transporting goods in is anathema. We don't want to do that. We want to try to do as much locally as we can. There are a lot of farmers in the local areas that are, disorganized because they don't have an outlet. They don't have a market within which to sell. So we're working with our local farmers. We're helping them get better organized. We're creating co-ops. We're teaching them sustainable farming techniques. And we're providing them a means by which they can then monetize their produce. So, that's an example. We're working with, environment is hugely important, and I think we've enough of that has been said throughout the session today. We've hired people from the local communities as environmental stewards to help us, two things: clean islands, right? We're all facing the plastics issue and stuff washing up, so we're constantly going around and collecting the plastic to then be disposed of in a more proper way. But we're also, by hiring local people, they're in the communities educating. Our biggest source of plastic that's locally generated is fishermen. The fishermen fill up their oil put oil into their engines, then they throw the oil can into the water. And so, again, we're trying to educate them in terms of the things that, let's not do that because you're ultimately damaging your own livelihoods. We're employing lots and lots of people locally. I think today we have over 2,000 people working either directly for us or through our contractors because, again, we have a huge workforce. We have over 10,000 construction workers on site today. We're going to be peaking at around 40,000. So a lot of that is going to come from the community. But as I said before, I think we need to recognize the value of the local communities to the tourism offer. Tourists value authenticity. They want to meet the local people. They want to meet the people that live there. They don't want to meet the rich Saudis because they're not necessarily living in our location, though they're very nice. So again, it's giving them those opportunities. And I'm going to quote, Ronald Reagan talked about trickle-down economics. I'm actually seeing it firsthand. The local communities all of a sudden are seeing great economic activity. Some of them are entrepreneurial. Some of them are getting, buying equipment to work within the construction space. Others are providing lodging. Lodging is a huge problem.
And I foresee in the future as well, they might be diving schools or fishing boats that are actually locally operated. So.
Absolutely, all of it is. We want to tap into our local environment and our local people because they know the place better than anybody. We hire numerous boat captains, as you can imagine. We're a largely island-based destination, and so everything we do is marine-based at the moment. And so the best captains, boat captains, come from the local area because they know the water like the back of their hand. And it's so rich in coral that you can't go from here to that little cushion there in a straight line because there's coral in between, and they know how to navigate to get there. So again, we're working very much so with our local communities. We have huge amounts of training. I'm going to touch a little bit on what Ana Paula said. We're training our workforce, across the entire spectrum. We have high-level, international hospitality management, scholarship recipients that are doing it at the University of Prince Megrin, which is also a program accredited by École Hôtelière de Lausanne. And there's huge enthusiasm for this. We had 120 places, we had 12,000 applications. But we're not stopping at that upper management end of it. We need vocational training too. We're working with our Human Resources Development Fund. Today we have something like 600 people that are training in hospitality, in engineering, in renewable energy, in airport operations. And again, the demand is huge. We had tens of thousands of applications. That initiative is going to scale up tenfold at least.
No, I'm glad you're covering it all because I care less about my cappuccino being perfect than the guy that's throwing an oil can into the ocean.
Yeah, no, but we have to. Education starts at the very beginning. Now, I can't influence primary school education. That's the government's job, although we work very closely with them and are encouraging them to do so. But we're providing the curriculums for all the training that's happening. So all that work that we're doing on a vocational basis is led by my learning and my learning department, which is really there to not only teach them the skills, but also the sustainability, how to deal with your customers. English language is important, so we're part of the training, and it's a 2.5-year program. It's not 6 months you're in and you're out. It's a 2.5-year program. So we're getting great support. But really, it's ultimately, as a developer, it's recognizing the value of your local communities and actually making them part of the destination, which I think is the key.
Great. Arvind, I think you have a very specific or unique, let's call it, situation because of the population size in India. I know that there have been efforts to create jobs, even have someone that sits in the elevator just to press buttons to actually support communities and make sure that the unemployment rate is not that high. How are you, from a tourism perspective, looking at creation of jobs and also the support of these fringe communities that maybe now you're looking to push more tourists towards?
Thank you. Our size also gives us an advantage that we have a lot of variety in the country. We have different experiences and different, geographical conditions in different parts of the country. So, I would just start first I will give you, some examples later. But first, I would just like to, start by saying that the role of the government in all this is to provide the regulations and the incentives so that all the stakeholders, whether be it the private sector, whether be it the tourists or the local communities, all are focused on sustainability as the end goal. And then the other, collateral benefits, employment, incomes, and all kick in. Now, I'll give you some examples. So you see the statue, you see the photograph here. That's an example of an iconic site that has been developed in our country recently. And a large amount of investment has been done by the local governments and the national governments. That infrastructure creation by way of better roads and better facilities, including a water aerodrome to land seaplanes over there, has of course provided a lot of jobs and employment there in that area. If you go to the site, what you'll see is all the guides are local people. This site is in the backwaters of an irrigation dam, and the area was totally housed by tribal communities. So you'll find that these are local boys and girls who are serving as drivers, who are doing the jobs as guides, and who are enriching from the entire tourist infrastructure creation there. If you go to the eating facilities there, the restaurants, these are run by self-help groups of tribal women who lived in the villages near the site who are running them. So this is an example of where a large tourism infrastructure project impacts and provides economic and livelihood benefits to the local community, even if they're very marginalized communities from the tribal groups. Another example that I'll give you from different parts of the country is people talked about local lodgings, and we call them homestays in our country. And we find that as a phenomenon was growing, and it has gained a lot of traction, and it has become a very attractive place to stay for many tourists, especially in the inaccessible parts of the country. For instance, in the hilly states of Himachal Pradesh, or in Sikkim, or in some parts of the Northeast, you will find that a lot of local resources are being used by the local residents to build homestays where tourists from domestic, different parts of the country as well as from abroad are staying. So our endeavor as the government would be to, emulate, collect these best practices and come out with some standard guidelines which will help encourage the growth of more and more homestays in the country in different regions. So that is an example where these encourage the local community, provide employment, and provide incomes to the local community. Another example I'll give, I was recently, I had gone for an event to a border state, which is on the border of Myanmar, the state of Nagaland. And they do an annual festival there, which is known as the Hornbill Festival. And that is an example where the local culture, the local traditions have been tried to be preserved and showcased to foreign tourists. and it attracts tourists from abroad. I mean, when I went there, there were a lot of diplomats from different countries who were visiting that spot, that corner, which is it is far away from the center of the country. It's on the, as I said, on the eastern border of the country. But that local festival brings out the local flavor, involves the local community, gives them a sense of pride in their culture, and it also encourages tourism in that area. So these are examples that I see. We'll see more of such examples. These are 3 examples that I gave from different parts of the country. But this is what we'll be encouraging more and more in the future, to provide local jobs, to provide more encouragement. And of course, for that, you need to, skill them up, train, because the requirements of skilling the population for all this is also very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Deepak, I know that you said you're working on new itineraries and trying to figure out how to push tourists to new destinations within India. In that effort, are you just hoping that the communities there figure it out, or are you also providing guidance and maybe potentially actually bringing these people under contract or paying them somehow to provide a better service for your customers?
So, one of the things that we are very clear about in the sustainability agenda that we set out for ourselves is that if the economic benefit does not go to the local communities, we've all failed. So this we are very, very clear about as one. Second thing is that we are also very clear that we need to educate not only the local community but also the eventual traveler who's coming, to ensure that the benefits are passed on at the local level. Now, we are making a conscious effort to educate people at a local level, to explain to them the economic benefit, and also partner with them to see wherever we can get them to encourage them to further develop products in order for people to stay longer. Now, I think good examples are ones in the rural parts of Rajasthan, of Kerala, Rajasthan being a state in the north and Kerala being a state in the south, and Tamil Nadu, where we are finding that we do a few things very, all drivers that we hire are local. That's rule number 1. All our managers in each office are locals. That is rule number 1 for me. I would not hire a manager unless, of course, that skill set is not available. But the person has to be from that town. The other thing is the drivers have to be local, so they feel and merge into the community and encourage people to see and understand the destination much better because they are from there. And going on like this, we in fact, even food, we are looking and finding local restaurants, which in most cases people used to say, oh, you'll fall ill if you go and eat there, which is total rubbish, because we have found that if we can encourage some of the local restaurants to prepare food for foreigners, they are employing more people locally. People are not just going and eating at a predictable 5-star hotel. They are getting an experience of a lifetime and such. So, all along the journey, we are making sure that the community gets the benefit. Now, we are also making sure that, small standalone hotels. I think Mr. Singh spoke about it in terms of homestays. We are also talking to smaller hotels and saying 4, 5, 6 locally owned hotels. Don't worry, you don't need to be, the fancy glitzy hotels like you have in Dubai. You can have an experiential hotel with great food, a super host, and we won't send you in a Rolls Royce, but our cars are good enough and our roads are fantastic. So, together like that, we are literally working with communities to try and build things. Now, I must confess here, the Indian hospitality business is miles ahead than most places, because they have been working on sustainable practices for a long time. There are hotels in the south that have worked with the local community in order to build hotels, in order to repair hotels, in order to give a lot of local employment is encouraged. And I think as a destination, we have done extremely well on this count. But there is still a lot to be done. A lot needs to be done. And I think, with the government who's now putting into place a very serious, sustainability has become a very serious topic for us in the last 2 years, as we have seen even with the government. And I think this is going to just make it even better for us in the coming years.
Yeah, Dubai hotels are also supporting the Indian community employment rate.
I knew that was coming.
We love you guys. We appreciate you. And finally, I want to ask from a data perspective again. What is the data telling us about the experience of a traveler or a tourist when it comes to interacting with the community? Have you guys looked at that at all in your research?
Yeah, we have actually. So I guess what the data is showing us about how tourists interact, there's a variety of different things that are coming out, and I think some of them are positive, and some of them also provide us as people within the industry with a set of challenges. So the data is showing us that there is this increasing interest in people having what we regard as sort of authentic experiences. And it's also showing us, when we can get this data from the internet at looking at what people are actually looking for in their experiences, is also showing us that visitors are looking for experiences. Some visitors are looking for experiences where they can have authentic experiences that give them a sense of well-being, and they're really interested in going to regional and remote areas to have those experiences, particularly in light of COVID, because they feel like they're not in a crowded city and they can get away. So I think that's sort of what it's showing us. It's also showing us at the moment that people are changing their travel patterns in terms of, last minute bookings, and also sometimes we're seeing that people are actually using those homestays to actually work from it, because we're becoming more of a digital nomad culture. So that's what it's showing us. But I think also the data is also giving us a lot of challenges, and I don't want to be the killjoy, but I think, the challenge for us in an industry is that we know that there's this growing body of people who are really interested in sustainable experiences and regenerative experiences and things like that. But we also know that there's a large amount of people who just want travel, and there's this concept of revenge travel that's been talked about recently. And that's where people have not been able to travel for a long time, and they're going to go traveling when borders open and get it back. They want to have their travel experiences back. But what that means is that many people may be quite willing to ignore, the environmental or social consequences of their travel. And that's what the data is showing us as well. So I think, the challenge for us as an industry is to think about, to be realistic, that we also have to nudge travellers, that cohort of people who really don't care. We have to teach them to care. We have to educate them to care. And we also have to, encourage them through their behaviours in hotels. They can, there's a lot of research going into the best ways to nudge people into environmental behaviours. So giving them discounts, giving them coffee vouchers, giving them money off if they actually, behave in an environmentally friendly way. So I think that's sort of what the data is showing us. The other thing I think, thinking forward into the future and, where we're at, where we go to, is the data is showing us also that because we have this increasing interest in going into the regions and off the beaten track, as this, event is called, we also have to think very carefully about the practices that we do to collect the data and to listen to the communities. So I think that we have to really, we have to challenge ourselves in terms of thinking about how do we interact with communities? Are we interacting with marginalised people without voices? Are we talking to women? Are we talking to people who are literate? And even in Tasmania, there's 49% of people in Tasmania are functionally illiterate, so they struggle to fill out surveys. have people who might not care so much about sustainable, practices. And that's where we have to really, encourage them to be more environmentally and socially, culturally and economically responsible in their behaviour.
Yeah, you're right, though. I think incentives is the only way. But please do release a lot of this research once it's ready, whether it's white papers or because, and I'm serious about this because a lot of the developers, and John, I think, is an outlier here. What they're doing in Saudi is really looking at the whole, like we said, holistically, how to be sustainable. But a lot of developers and a lot of operators as well view helping the community or helping the environment or being sustainable in any way as a cost. Whereas
Yes.
if your research comes out and says, actually, the customer is enjoying this experience more because it's giving back, because there's an authenticity to the community experience, because so on and so forth, I think it will drive the change much sooner than to just hope that they do it because of regulation or government mandates. With that, I will open the floor to questions from the audience, if anyone has any. I think there's mics on the peripheries. Anybody? We have a question in the back? It's okay.
Thank you. So my question is for perhaps Anne or perhaps John, Mr. Pagano. In terms of making tourism economically viable, if you're saying that incentives are the way, so it's making it cheaper or having the consumer pay less, but we all know that sustainability costs more to a business, how would a business be like, okay, this is going to cost me more, not only am I paying more for a sustainable option, but plus I'm going to be giving it cheaper, air quotes, cheaper to my consumer. Why would a business even want to think that way? Or how can we nudge them in saying that we want to make this cost, putting that cost in? As a daughter from a small business owner, I try to help my mom push towards sustainable, and how can I get her to do that?
I'll let you think.
Sure.
You seem to be, Anne, I think you're ready. The
Yeah,
data.
sure.
So you want to jump
I'm
on
also
it.
I'm also the daughter from a small business, so that's lovely to know. But I think one of the examples is some really fantastic research that's been coming out of the University of Queensland by a professor called Sarah Dolnicher. And what she's found is that you can nudge behaviours in ways that in a couple of ways. So one of them, which is actually a really cost-free alternative, is around food waste. So what she's found very simply is that, say, we all love a good buffet and we love a restaurant with a great buffet and we like to fill our plate up, really, really high. So what she's found is if the restaurants actually just reduce the plate size, that people will actually eat less. So we don't like to be seen to be going, piling up our plate. So people go back many, many times to fill up their plate. But if you actually reduce and they put small amounts proportional to the plate of food onto their plate. So if we actually reduce the size of the plate, people will still go back to the buffet, the same amount of times, but they put less food on their plate each time. So that's I think a great example of it's actually, I guess, it's an incentive, but not really even an incentive. It's just nudging very gently, and you can actually explain why that happens. But another example might be she's also done research where she's found it's really successful to reward people for doing particular things, like saying, if you don't want to have your room cleaned every day, we'll actually give you a $20 voucher, every second day or whatever it might be, to go and buy a nice cocktail at the bar, for example. And that's found to be really, really successful. But actually the $20 that the business gives to the customer in a voucher is actually far less cost to them than they make more profit from not actually cleaning the room than the voucher. So it's a nice offset. So I think there's some really interesting research that's coming out through these Australian institutes on cost-efficient ways to actually nudge or incentivize behaviour.
I think that's a perfect term, nudging. That's what you need to. It's not forcing or changing behavior. It's just nudging people in the right way. Though you don't know the people I know when it comes to buffets. John, please.
So you're the guy with the big
Directly.
plate, huh?
Not me, but the people I know.
Look, I think I agree with you. I think there's a contradiction. You can't incentivize by reducing cost and fund sustainable. And sustainable is more expensive, at least today, right? Because, you know, unless and until you get greater take-up and greater traction, it's competition will ultimately drive the cost of making sustainability more deliverable. We're in the fortunate position in Saudi Arabia where we have a leadership and a government that, you know, gets the big picture and wants to really position Saudi Arabia on the global tourism map, and we're prepared to take a much longer term view. So we are spending more money in order to really differentiate ourselves. But as I said before, we're using the Red Sea as a platform to bring about change more globally. Because if we do it, and consumers, like I'll go back to, again, we've had a debate, I believe the consumers will ultimately force this change. I think, you know, the data is saying that apart from the revenge travelers, that there's, you know, strong data supporting the notion that people want to travel more responsibly. And if you offer the consumer that choice, and even if it has a slightly higher price tag associated with it, I think that there are going to be sufficient numbers of people that are going to want to take that more responsible decision rather than staying somewhere less expensive, but, you know, at the expense of the environment or society.
Especially the newer generation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But you see the Greta Thunberg movement and you know, the COP26, you know, again, COVID has given us this wake-up call that has really caused us to think about what's important in life. And it's not opulence. It's not about the, you know, the thread count on our bed sheets. It's about our health. It's about, you know, being in touch with nature. It's about protecting our planet. And I do think that, you know, that the trend will change. It's already changing. It was changing before COVID. I think, you know, COVID has just accelerated it.
And I think there's a very interesting point, too, in the design itself of sustainable buildings and in the use, for example, of water or energy. You know, many hotel chains have discovered that using water more responsibly is actually benefiting them at the end in the cost of water, especially in places where
to actually turn the lights off, which back in the day, a 5-star hotel with the lights off, how can that be? But now,
yes,
you're right.
So I think there is again, the market is changed. We have a new consumer, and that new consumer is demanding a new type of product.
Yep.
Can I disagree?
Of course.
Okay. Sustainability.
Not with me, with them. You
No,
can.
no. I mean, with the question. Okay, with the question. Sorry, you're the victim.
Please go ahead.
Sustainability is not more expensive. There's an error thinking about that. Because we're only thinking of sustainability as putting solar panels in our hotel or restaurant to have electricity. And it's much bigger than that. And that's the biggest problem we're facing. Because we're not convincing small companies, and once again I go to the small companies, that this is the way to go. Very simple steps, like circular economy, like spending less, like focusing on what the client needs, is sustainability. And sometimes we forget about that. And going back to the second part, which we disagree, if we depend on the consumer, we will only get there in 200, 300 years. And we need it now. And when we talked about responsibility, some have more responsibility than others. And clearly, big corporations, hotel chains, big companies, and governments have bigger responsibilities than small companies.
I actually agree with that. And it's the consumer. You cannot rely on the consumer.
No.
If you look at the ozone layer, and the reason that we actually solved the issue with the ozone layer is because of regulation.
Yeah.
If we were to wait for the consumer, we would have a bigger hole over the Antarctic Circle. So
And just to give you another, we all see big campaigns of hotel chains saying that they reduce the plastic and they put the sensors in the bedroom. But how much do you pay for a hotel room in an island lost in the middle of the Pacific? And how much do you pay for a hotel room in Dubai? And probably it's less in Dubai than an island in the Pacific. But how much of that room rate goes to salaries of those people? Because when we talk about local communities, that room rate is paying for salaries. Do you pay attention to that? We should. We should be asking how much of my room rate goes to salaries, because that's the way to go to the local communities.
I think as advice from what he said as well is the narrative. Just change the narrative. How do you approach
Also,
introducing the sustainable initiatives? Instead of saying we're doing this initiative to be sustainable, say, listen, this is going to cut costs in this show, an Excel sheet. Over 6 months, we will be paying less if we do this. You knowing that it's a sustainable initiative without highlighting it or advertising as such.
Can I just jump in there, Zahid,
Of
for
course,
a second?
of course.
Yeah, just a very quick one. I said, first, I don't think you should apologize for sustainability. The second thing is you have to communicate to your customer why are you going to charge more for offering a sustainable product. The communication is very important, like you just said. It is the key, because half the time people are not communicating why a sustainable product is doing so much good for which you're paying a very little amount. I'll give you a very simple example. I was at a lodge a few months ago. They were charging $25 per person over and above a very expensive rate for conservation fees. And it was mentioned as conservation fees, and they explained what they do with that money. I asked the hotel, I said, how many people have complained in the last 3 years about this extra money that you take after charging a huge amount of money? And they said 2 people in the last 5 years. So it's a matter of communicating. You have to communicate, and you have to stop, and there is no apology for charging extra for conservation and for sustainability.
Okay, we did run out of time. I'm sorry. Thank you for your question. Thank you to the panel. If you can just give them a round of applause, please. Thank you for the Indian and Portuguese pavilions for working and bringing us together, and thank you for the Expo team as well. I think there is, I don't know if I should announce, but there is a after party, if you will, at the Portuguese pavilion. You're all welcome to join.
now that I said that the Spanish party better than the Portuguese, but it's not true.
We're all going to take naps is what we're going to do, apparently. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. You were a great host.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, my
Very
pleasure.
good.
Thank you.